All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second part of the Cloud Essentials Bootcamp. So for today, we're going to look at topic B and topic C, but we're going to start with topic B, which focuses on how do we identify cloud network and cloud storage technologies. So the two objectives for this particular session is us identifying what cloud network concepts are, as well as identifying cloud storage technologies as well. At any point, if you feel like I'm talking too fast, if you want to ask me any questions, feel free to either raise your hands up or put it in the group chat, and I will definitely create space for you to have that conversation. So we're now going to go to the next slide, which focuses on cloud networking techniques. Now, the two ones we're going to focus on software-defined networking, which is a networking technology. And then we're also going to focus on secure remote administrations. Now, it's important to know that there are many different types of network connection types. And all networks, especially cloud networks, needs to be both secure and reliable. But I'm going to talk about each of these two networks shortly. So I'm going to start with discussing software-defined network and what does it mean. So software-defined networking, or SDN, is a network architecture where the control plane, which makes decisions about how packets should be forwarded or how they need to be decoupled from data planes, which is how you forward packets to a destination. This allows for a centralized management and for configuration for the network devices. The next slide after this will be a bit more clearer because it would have an infographic explaining it a bit more. But essentially, the control plane, which makes decisions about how packets should be forwarded, is decoupled from another data plane. So the control plane is decoupled from the data plane. Now, the data plane is what forwards the packets to their destination. So this allows for centralized management. Hi, Sasha. Do you want me to finish the destination, or did you have a question you want to ask quickly?
I'm really sorry, what's a plane or a data plane?
So a plane is where decisions about how packets should be forwarded are made. That's for the control plane. While for the data plane, it's where packets are forwarded to their destinations. And this is all regarding networks. Did that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
No worries. Now, this allows a centralized management and configuration of the network devices. So because it's a centralized systems, it's more dynamic and more flexible than traditional networks, which were less decentralized, if that makes sense. They were more decentralized. And you would see from the infographics the difference between traditional networks and now our software-defined networks, which are more dynamic and flexible. Now, I would say that a good analogy for this is to imagine a busy train station, for example, right? Now, this train station has multiple tracks and trains going from one destination to another. Now, in a traditional setup, each track would have their own conductor or their own train driver, right? Who individually decides where the train is going to go, what time it's going to go, where it's going to go, and things of that nature. Now, let's say that in this kind of structure, because each train track has its own train driver, which makes its own decisions, there isn't a cohesive management of the trains in regards to people knowing what time they need to be in, where the train is going to go, or timetables or things like that. It's more chaotic and is more inefficient because each driver is deciding where the train goes rather than it being a centralized system where each driver knows where they're going and things are more cohesive. Now, imagine if there's, like I said, a central control room, which in this case is a control panel. Now, the control room decides where each train driver is going to go, where their train is going to go, what time their train is supposed to be at each train station and things like that. Now, because there's a centralized system and everybody knows the part that they play within this centralized system, things are working more efficiently because everybody knows where they need to be at what time, rather than each train driver making their own decision, which kind of reduces the fact of things being more cohesive or things being more effective. So I would say that a central control room is like a SDN in the sense that individual tracks of the trains represent different traditional network paths, but in a CDN, because it's controlled in one central control plane, it's a lot easier to know where things are being distributed. So because of that, network devices may be geographically distributed, but they're centrally managed by one source. Now, going back into the infographic I was talking about, in a traditional realm, you had one admin person and you had one switch, right? Now, one admin can only focus on, let's say one admin person can only focus on 2 switches at the same time. Because of kind of the limited control in regards to one person controlling 2 different stations than one centralized system that controls millions of different network stations, it's very ineffective because there's only one individual controlling two control networks. And because there's only one person that's controlling those 2 control networks, other people will be deciding for other networks where they should go. But because of that, it's going to be very chaotic because there isn't a centralized view of how decisions are being managed, especially with the networks. So that's why we've now moved from the decentralized, individually managed switches to more centralized. So you would see that here there is a switch configuration management server, which allows you to make decisions to the different networks. And one server, because it's centralized, can have access to millions of switches, right? Millions of clouds across the network. So because it's centralized and managed from one source, it's easier to control the network to ensure that the security, for example, within the networks within a particular area are contained, managed, and it's kind of easy to kind of change things a lot quickly than when different parts of the cloud are managed by different people. So that's why you'd know that when we're looking at cloud, there are different providers, but aren't a lot of providers as well. So when we're looking at software-defined networking, it focuses on us moving away from a traditional decentralized kind of managing of our networks and moving into a more centralized format, which allows things to be more cohesive and allows security to be more implemented a lot more effectively because it's from a centralized source rather than it being from a decentralized source. So that's software-defined technology. When we're now looking at secure remote administration, that is network traffic that are easy to kind of intercept and read. I will say that a secure remote secure remote administration refers to the methods and protocols used to safely manage and administer remote devices. So in this case, we're not just looking at networks, we're looking at the remote devices and systems over a network. Now, given that, for example, the vulnerabilities that are involved in trying to transmit data from A to B within the internet, it's imperative that there is a communication between the administrator and the remote system, and that communication between the administrator and the remote system are encrypted. Why it's important for it to be encrypted is that it allows the data flow to be secure, because when it's encrypted, it's going to be hard for a third party to read that information. So because of that, it allows the security of the kind of communication between the remote devices and the network to be done in a seamless manner and in a secure manner as well. So cloud administrators must always use a secure network connection to manage the cloud service. An example of this would be, as you can see here, we have the cloud administrator laptop, and then here you have your HTTPS tunnel across the internet. Now, what I will say about these kind of cloud administrators is that, as you can see from here, you're able to, number one, see your virtual machine. You're able to kind of see your usage. And again, the key word is that encryption of data flow. Because your data is being encrypted within the cloud or between your secure device to the network, it allows you to protect your data within the cloud. So I would say that that's a difference between secure network. Defined networking deals with having a centralized control plane where you're able to manage different network devices, while with your secure remote administration, you're really dealing with remote devices and how they send data flows between a remote device across a network. So that's a good way to think about that. I will say like a good analogy to really think about secure remote administration is to think of a confidential letter that you don't want anyone else to know about, and that you're sending it to somebody that is close to you. You simply put it in a letter, in a regular envelope, and you send it. However, if you're sending an envelope, there's a risk that somebody could open that letter, right, and read your secret or read the content of that letter. Now, imagine if you had a special envelope that has a special lock that only you, the receiver, let's say your loved one, they have the special lock, and it's only somebody with that key that can open that lock. Now, because of that kind of lock and key or that safety measure, you know that your information within that letter is safe, because as you're sending that letter to your loved one, because you have a special lock and the receiver has a special key, you're able to ensure that those content of that information is encrypted, is safe, is secure. There's not going to be any extra third party reading it. Goes to say the same thing for secure remote administrator. So now think about secure administration like using a special locked envelope and ensuring that the intended recipient, in that case, your family, friend, or your loved one, can access that information, and it's only the intended receiver that can access that information. So again, when we're looking at secure remote administration, we're really thinking about data flows and how we're ensuring that those data flows are secure. Now, what I will say before we move on is that there are different network types, right? So just like there's various modes of transportations, we have cars, we have trains, we have planes, there are different ways in which data can travel across network. And each of that is designed specifically for a special purpose or a special scenario. Now, another thing to note as well when we're talking about networks and network connections and network type is that in the same way that we want our transportations to be safe, we don't want them to have an accident, and we want them to be reliable, we want them to arrive on time, we expect our network data to reach its destination without being tampered or with it being sent and received at a reasonable time. Now, I will say like the final 3 points is that when we're looking at secure defined networking, SDN is like having a GPS that can instantly reroute your path based on the real-time traffic data. So rather than sticking to a predefined route that might have an unexpected roadblock, it's flexible in its case where it can move to the intended sender through different forms or different routes. It doesn't have to follow like the traditional route where we have one admin person and one network, because the centralized system has access to different networks. Again, it can work like a GPS and navigate its way through those networks to get to the intended receiver or recipient. Now, I will say that when we're looking at ways of configuring network devices, it's centrally defined. So instead of individuals setting, like, for example, a light bulb, instead of like having an individual setting each light bulb in your house, imagine that you have a centralized control system where you can change the brightness, the color, the schedule for all the light bulbs in your home at once. That is what an SDN essentially is like in regards to it being a centrally defined system. Now, I will say that the other thing to think about is that it reduces your workload, especially workloads for network administrators. So rather than having like a remote control for all electronic devices in your home, imagine that you have just one device that allows you to use your TV in all rooms, rather than you having to actually deal with having each different remote for each TV. You have a centralized system. And finally, when we're talking about it being geographically distributed, imagine having a chain of fast food restaurants, right? Even each outlet are spread across the country. Decisions about the menu, pricing, and promotions are often made from a centralized headquarters, right? So you have, let's say McDonald's, for example, you can go anywhere in the world and you would expect to see the same meal at each McDonald's franchise wherever you go in the world, right? Because it's centrally managed. The menus aren't really changed. The pricings aren't really changed. The promotions, what's on offer is the same. Why? Because it has a centralized unit. And that's the same thing when we're talking about software-defined networking, as well as when we're talking about a secure remote administration. Now, when we're going to the types of remote access types, we have 3. But I will say that it's very important for us to kind of understand what an SSH is, or a secure shell, a remote desktop protocol, and a hypertext transfer protocol secure is. This is because when we're talking about remote access, we are referring to the ability to access a computer or a network remotely. Well, and this is done through a network connection. Now, think of remote access as having the ability to open your home's front door from anywhere in the world using a secure virtual key, right? That you're able to access your home because you have your virtual key at any point, even if you're not at home, because you have a virtual control key, you can open the door anytime. And then when we're going to the different types, I would say that the three main ones we need to know for this exam is secure shell, remote desktop protocol, and hypertext transfer protocol secure. When we're looking at secure shell, which is also known as SSH, and I will say that when you're taking notes, please write down the acronyms, because the acronyms will be used in the exam as well. So SSH is a cryptographic network protocol that allows remote network command line administration. So this is commonly utilized within Linux systems as well as network devices. Now imagine SSH is a secure telephone line where you can give verbal instructions to someone at your home to perform a certain task. Let's say you have a sibling, a sister at home, and you call your sister and say, hey, I need you to do X, Y, and Z. The telephone allows you guys to have that remote connection for you to make those commands, right? So the conversation in this case would be data transmission is encrypted, meaning no one else can understand your conversation, even if they tap into your line. So let's say you and your sister have a special language that you speak that, let's say you guys are speaking French, you're speaking Yoruba, you're speaking another language. By you speaking another language, you're kind of encrypting the data that's being shared and the instructions that are being shared. So it means that if a third party tries to intercept your conversation, because you guys have encrypted your conversation via language, you're able to secure the commands that are being taken place. And that's the same thing when we're thinking about secure shell. I would say that's important to note that the key features of a secure shell is encrypted communication. Encryption means when you change the form of a data to make sure that it's unreadable to anyone else who isn't the intended receiver. Hi, Afia, you raised your hand.
So I have two questions. I just want to kind of understand if I'm moving in the right direction with what you're explaining. Does this have anything to do with the different types of encryption methods, like symmetric key encryption and stuff like that?
Yes, but I think it's looking at different, there is encryption with all three, but it's looking at the different type of remote access. So it deals with you having remote access to a particular cloud or a particular device, for example. So the example I gave where, let's say you have a digital key in your front door and you have a virtual key, which means you have remote access at any point, whether you're at home or not at home, you can open the door.
Yeah.
Because you have remote access. Now, with these different types, it's talking about what the different methods are. So
Not
what are the different
necessarily what the types of encryption are.
Yeah. Well, the different type of encryption will be in the way the remote access is being done. It might look different. So there is encryption, but it's not focused on the encryption, but rather focused on the remote access and the tools and way in which you are actually accessing that, having a remote access, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, and second question, I just wanted to know if the exam was platform specific. So are we going to need to know things to do with like Linux and Microsoft and all of that, like specifically, or is it generalized?
It's generalized and it's vendor neutral.
Okay, cool. All right, thank you.
No worries. So when we're going, I'll say the key features to think about with secure shell is it has encrypted communication, it has a command line interface, and it's a key-based authentication procedure. So remember the example I gave of the lock and key. Think about authentication as key-based. When we're looking at remote desktop protocol, or RDP, it's basically a protocol that facilitates the encrypted graphical representation of a user interface, allowing users to remotely access a window desktop environment. So I'll say a good way to kind of think about this, if we're going to use an analogy, is picture RDP as having a secure video call with your home computer, where you can see its desktop control from a distance. You can interact with it visually, just like you would if you were physically present at the location. Another way to think about this is, I know that with Microsoft Teams, sometimes it allows you to give individuals access. So somebody else can control your screen if you give them access, if you're sharing your screen. So that's another way to think about remote desktop protocol as it being in real time. Now, I'll say that what are the key features of a remote desktop protocol is a graphical user interface, encrypted connection. So remember, going back to kind of the question around encryption, when we're looking at secure shell, we're looking at encrypted communication. So the communication, the data is being encrypted. When we're looking at remote desktop protocol, it is the connection between A and B that is being encrypted rather than the data. So it's actually the connection, the network connection that's being encrypted. And it has a multi-channel support as well. Now, when we're going into the final one, which is hypertext transfer protocol, or what we know as HTTPS, it's a secure version of HTTP. So it's used for secure communication over a computer network within a web browser. And that is because it's encrypting the data being sent and received using a secure remote administration via a web browser. So I would say, if we want to look at an analogy for this, is think of HTTPS using the same letter analogy that I spoke about earlier, is sending a letter through a tamper evident secure envelope, right? So when you're having a tamper evident secure envelope, you know that when you receive that envelope, it's secure because it hasn't been tampered with. Because if somebody tries to tamper with it, you'd be able to know. And that's the same thing with HTTPS. It ensures that the message or the data that is sending through the web browser is secure and hasn't been altered during the transit. So the key features is similar to the secure shell. It focuses on encrypted communication. So that's what makes it similar to secure shell. However, it focuses on web browser accessibility, and it then also deals with a security certificates as well. So that's kind of the way that I will kind of describe the three different types and the different features as a way of you to understand where they might be similar, but also where they might be different. So now when we go into cloud technologies, especially cloud storage technologies, cloud storage is easily accessible from virtually or any location and any device. Now, I would say that cloud storage refers to saving data on off-site storage system maintained by a third party. And a third party could be any cloud vendor like AWS, Google Cloud, or Azure. Now, think of cloud storage as like a VAS, right? Like a virtual library. No matter where you are in the world, you can check out a book, which the book is like an analogy of you can access data as long as you have the right library card, which in this case would be your access credentials. So when you're thinking about cloud storage, it has your information in this vault. For you to be able to access the information, you need to have the right access credentials, which authenticates you and allows you to then view the data. Now, I will say with cloud storage technologies, it's very important as well to think about which cloud storage technology would be suitable for what type of solution. So a good way to think about it is thinking about it from three different audiences. You have your enterprises, which are your large organizations, multinational companies. Then you have your small enterprises or your small businesses. And then you have your home user cloud storage solutions. Now, when we're thinking about big organizations, right, this is tailored for large businesses. It means that the storage that they're going to have is very large. They would need advanced security features and integrations with other enterprise applications, because if they're a large organization, it means that they're going to have loads of third-party clients, suppliers that they're using. So it's going to be very complex, and it's going to have an advanced security feature with it because it needs that integration with other enterprise applications being used. Now, when we're looking at small businesses, you need cloud storage to be something that is simple, affordable, and is scalable, right? And then when we're looking at home user solution, that's what like every single one of us. And that will be personal cloud storage solutions. So this will be great for like videos, personal files, photos, and things like that. A good example of a home user solution would be Google Drive. So each of us have a Gmail. If you have a Gmail account, you would then have a Google Drive account, which is like your own home user cloud storage. Now, if you are a small business, you might then be using Google Workspace, which is more for like SMEs. And then if you're bigger enterprises, you might then have more of a custom procedure with either Google Cloud or Azure or Microsoft or Amazon, depending on your needs. Now, when we're looking at the different features of storages, I would say that there are three types. You have your data compression, your data duplication, and your data storage capacity. Now, when we're looking at data compression, it's a method that reduces the size of data to allow efficient storage or efficient transfer. So an example is, let's say you're trying to send a large video to somebody else, you might use WeTransfer, which allows you to compress the data and then send it to somebody else, whether it's you sending it to them via a link that they can download or things like that. Also, there are different forms that allows you to kind of like reduce the size of a document, image, photo, video, that allows you to be able to send it, whether it's via email or other stuff. And the next one is data duplication. So this is just the process of eliminating redundant data. So ensuring that you don't have duplicated data within the cloud, that you're able to kind of delete old versions as well of a particular data. So instead of like keeping identical copies of a photo, you can only keep one for reference or whenever needed. Same thing, you would delete all the similar old versions of a particular document and only keep the current version. So that's data duplication. It's all about eliminating redundant data. Now, the final one, which really looks at the cloud storage capacity, that deals with scalability and flexibility, right? So cloud storage can be visualized like a balloon, which can be inflated, which means it can be scaled up, or it can be deflated, which means it can be scaled down based on requirements. Now, if you remember the NIST 5 different characteristics of cloud, remember when we were looking at on-demand, managed services, and elasticity, it deals with managing the capacity based on demand, making it both scalable and flexible. Now, when we're looking at cloud storage characteristics, and let's talk about performance. When we're looking at performance, we're looking at network performance, we're looking at storage media performance, and we're looking at cost implications. So when we deals with network performance, you're looking at what is the speed and quality of the connection between the user and the cloud storage. So let's say you're looking to see which cloud provider will be the best for your company. You want to be looking at the network performance of that cloud provider that you're using, or the cloud storage that you're looking at. The second one will be your storage media performance. So this deals with how quickly can data be read, written at the provider data center. So again, if we are going back into the concept I introduced last week, which was the CIA triad, this will be dealing with the availability section of the CIA triad, especially when you're looking at security elements. And the final one is cost implication, right? So faster access will be seen as hot storage, but because it's a faster access and it's a hot storage, it means that it might be more expensive and also slower than like slower archival storage, which would be a cold storage. So you'll be looking based on your company needs. Is it something that you need hot storage, which kind of deals with faster access and faster performance? Or maybe if your company is more of an SME, you might go for more cold storage, which might be a bit slower, but is a lot more cheaper to use. So looking at the cost implications of it. Now, when we're looking at, so I think kind of going back into what hot and cold is, archived kind of system storages are ones that are rarely accessed data. So it might be stored on a relatively slow media and therefore cost less. Or if it's something that your company is going to be constantly accessing the data, it will then be referred to as a hot data because it's dealing with relatively fast media and therefore will cost more. So now when we're going to the different storage types, we have three types to consider. First one is file storage, the second one is block storage, and the third one is object storage. So with a file storage, data are organized into files and folders. And this would be seen as like traditional computer file systems with directories and files. So kind of like your natural documents or desktop, you'll be able to kind of see things grouped into files or into folders. Now, when you're dealing with like your block storage, that is data that is split into equally sized blocks. So this is storing items into fixed size containers, irrespective of the size of the items. So this can be, it means that these blocks may be stored on different medias. And because of that, it's more efficient, scalable, and easier to manage. And then you have your object storage. So this is when each piece of data is stored with a metadata and it has a unique identifier. Now, it means that each item, for example, let's say you're in a warehouse, each item has a unique barcode and a description tag, and you can scan the barcode to kind of see what is the information behind that unique item. Similarly, in this case, it means that any document, any file, any entity that is being kind of like stored in the cloud are able to be easily found because each of it will have its own unique metadata and it will have its own unique identifier as well. And it tends to be the most favored storage type because it's very scalable and also very efficient. Now, when we're talking about personal cloud storage, it kind of deals with home users and small businesses and how do they utilize cloud storage on a relatively small scale. So this is looking at cloud technology that may be provided by a network attached storage known as a NAS device that is attached to the home user's internal network. So when we're looking at what is the essence, for example, of a personal cloud storage. So it's a cloud storage that is tailored for individual users or small businesses, and it allows for easy storage and easy retrieval of personal or business data. Now, how this will be used is like, home users may store photos and videos and documents, while small businesses can store their essential files, their client data, or their inventory list as well. And the tools that's being used is, as I mentioned, NAS, which is known as a network attached storage. And a NAS is often localized cloud storage and is connected to one's own internal network. So it's very much localized rather than it being connected to kind of more global system. It's kind of focused more on a localized cloud storage system. Now, going back into software-defined storage characteristics, it has many kind of key functions that you need to think about. So the first one is automated management. So this means that having a software-defined storage allows you to streamline your storage operation. It reduces that manual intervention needed to kind of change things because it's often centralized and you can kind of do it on a more automated kind of procedure system. Second element is your standard management interface, and that kind of unifies your dashboard or interface. So it's ensuring ease of use because visually you can kind of understand the kind of data you have, where it's being grouped and things like that. So there is a nice, easy dashboard depending on what type of software-defined storage you're using, and if it's one that is modified depending on your industry as well, as to what that dashboard would look like. You then have a visualized data path. Now, what this does is that it efficiently handles multiple data at once. So what are your data types to consider when you're thinking about your virtualized data path? It could be a block, it could be a file, and it can be an object. And if you remember, this kind of goes back into the different storage types that we talked about, which were file, block, and objects. So when we're now talking about it being scalable and flexible, is that it adapts to growing storage needs. Again, remember the example I talked about a balloon where you inflate it if you want it to be bigger, you pour more air into it. If you want it to be smaller, you remove the air. Again, because it's focused more on demand, it's more scalable and flexible because it adapts to the growing storage needs and it evolves with the user requirement. So, for example, if you have an iPhone, depending on how much storage you have on the iPhone, let's say you have so much pictures and videos and other resources on your iPhone, you do have the option to pay for a bigger storage. Similar to this, there's scalability and flexibility. You can increase the amount of storage that you're getting. Francis, I saw they had your hands up.
I wanted to ask if this standard management interface you're talking about can be like looking at your organization data on something like Microsoft Power Apps, where you are able to see like it's visualized in maybe percentages or pie charts and bar charts. Is it something like this?
Yes, that will then fall under your standard management interface where you're able to have a unified dashboard.
Oh, okay. So it means that those Power Apps can also be that they are also like some sort of personalized cloud stuff. No, like sorry, I just confused myself. It's okay.
So I think what this is dealing with software defined storage characteristics. So it's maybe using, like the example that you used of Power Apps. Yeah, I think Afia said like a monitoring system that you can visually see. Yes. So it tends to be a dashboard where you can visually see it. So that would be your standardized management interface. Because it allows you to see in real time what kind of files you have, percentage of how much space you've used. And I think the example of the iPhone was kind of showing that, with an iPhone, it shows you how much percentage is photos, how much percentage is apps. Like there's a user interface for you to be able to see like how much storage you are using and what percentage of what type of files is being is occupying what certain amount of percentage within the app. So let's say you're trying to reduce your space. If you see that you have loads of photos and videos, you would delete loads of photos and videos because you want to create space, or you buy or you pay a higher amount to have a bigger storage because of your demand is increasing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand better now. I understand better. Thank you.
No worries. So I would say like the final point is that it views storage resources across all technologies. So it has a holistic view in the sense that it offers insights to all storage resources across your varied technologies. So those are the key element if you're trying to think, what is a software defined storage? What are the characteristics of it? And if you have questions around that, these are the kind of key points that you need to think about. A good way to think about it, especially if you're writing your notes for studying, is to kind of put things into acronyms. So you could say like characteristics are ASV, SFV. And then once you have those kind of acronyms you've created for yourself, it can allow you to kind of understand some of these points when you're studying and revising. So now going into the next element, which is kind of talking about the benefits of cloud software defined storage, is that the first one is that it has the diverse storage media usage. So this means that it supports various storage forms like your flash drives, your solid state drives, your virtual disk, and your cloud storage. So there are different ways in which we can storage our stuff. If we're thinking about software defined storage, it can be a cloud, it can you be having like a USB, which is like a flash disk or a virtual disk. Is you having like a USB, is you having a virtual disk online or solid state. Like there are different ways in which we can store our data. Now, if we're looking at the cost efficiency, is that it scales out. So it means that adding more resources rather than scaling up, which deals with upgrading existing resource. So when we talk about cost and when we talk about storage, there are two things to think about when we're talking about scalability. It's either you're scaling out or you're scaling up. So when you're scaling out, you're adding more resources. when you're scaling up, you're upgrading existing resources. So the example of this would be, with the example I gave with an iPhone, if you're trying to get more space within your iPhone, you can scale up by paying for a bigger storage, or you can scale out by maybe having a buying like a hardware external drive where you can put more information there from your phone and then transfer it there. So there are different ways in which you can kind of deal with your storage. And then there's also automated scaling, which is without any administrative intervention. So this means that you can adjust your storage capacity automatically by eliminating administrative hassles. And this is mostly done when we're looking at clouds system. Thank you. Antonio said in the chat that this is incredibly useful during a network attack, which is also good when you're thinking about the scenarios of where this might be applicable. So now we're going to look at content delivery network, or SDN. I remember what I said about acronyms, making sure that you're writing down the acronyms. So an SDN, a definition of that would be a system of distributed servers that delivers content to users. So this is based, as you're seeing here, has the map, is based on their geographical location. And this is because by it being based on their geographical location, it ensures that it's faster, you have a faster and more efficient access. Also, the usage, it streamlines the access for users by enhancing loading times and improving the user experience. So what I will say is, from a provider, when we're talking about a cloud service provider perspective, it means that many cloud providers can offer an SDN as part of their service package. So SDN is content delivery network, and it's data that is dispersed geographically and stored near consumers, again, increasing the faster access. So if we go back into the previous point when I talked about hot or cold storages, content delivery network would fall under a hot storage, because you're accessing it regularly, and because you're accessing it regularly, you expect it to work at a decent time, to have like a fast access. So similar to the example I also used previously with the trains is, we have timetables, and you expect the train to get to the destination at its said timetable. So same thing with this one, you expect it to go on time, and it allows that kind of faster access within the network. Now, a recap of all the stuff that we've discussed. So we've said many things. I will start with network connection. So remember that a network, when we're thinking about network connections, is that we ensure that there is a robust network connection to prevent slow communication between cloud services and its users. There's also, remember when we talked about secure communications, so you have to employ secure protocols like SSH, HTTPS, and RDP for administrative tasks, because remember that falls under remote access types. And then when we're talking about performance, consideration, especially when we're looking at cloud services, is that you have to recognize the interdependence of cloud storage and its impact on service performance. And then when we are choosing a storage, we have to consider, what is the data type that my company or my organization that I'm working with, what data do we use? What is the data type? What is the speed requirements? And then based on those two things, on both data type and access speed requirement, it allows you to then select the most suitable storage option, whether it's going to be a hot storage or whether it's going to be a cold storage. And then finally, implementing SDN, which is what we just talked about, is for business catering to a global audience. So let's say you're working for a multinational company, you might require a content delivery network, because it allows you to have resources from data centers that are relatively close to consumers. And if you're working with a global audience, that would be seen as a better option to implement, because you'll be able to have a faster content delivery. So that is it from me talking. So now I'm going to put everyone in groups. Remember when I talked about that I'm going to put people in breakout rooms to discuss. So the answer, I think I kind of already have written the answer, is what type of data might be stored in a cloud storage such as AWS or a cloud. Let me play for the current slides. I think the answer is already there, but it's basically archive data. So when we're thinking about AWS, which is seen as a cold storage, it's seen as an archive data that does not need to be accessed quickly or frequently. And because of that, it tends to be considered as a cold storage. So with this type of answer, this type of question, if you get an exam, the keyword you need to look at is, okay, it's talking about data storage, but it talks about cold storage. What is the characteristics of a cold storage? And then that will then give you your answer, which in this case is archive data. Why? Because the cold storage is archive data that doesn't need to be accessed quickly or frequently. So this is now going to be for discussion. So I'm going to put people in breakout rooms. I believe there is 25 of us. So I'll see if I can put us in groups of 5. Let me see how many breakout rooms that I can put people in. And I think it'll be good for everyone to first screenshot this page. I will also put the question in the chat as well. So I'm going to put everyone in groups of 5. And in this case, you are a business analyst on your organization's cloud migration team. And one of your colleagues approaches you with a concern about the migration project. The individual realizes that most cloud resources will be accessed by employees over the company's internet connection and is concerned that the internet connection may be overwhelmed by the traffic. What is your response to this? So I will start putting people in groups, but before I start, does anyone have any question about this question or what is expected? Francis?
It's not really about the question. It's about there was something you said about automated scaling without admin. Is it intervention? I didn't really understand that part. Like what it was really about. The benefits of software-defined storage, the automated scaling. Is it that it shrinks by itself and it increases by itself depending on what data you put into it?
Yes, but it also means that you can automate. So let's say that you want to delete duplicated information. You can do that in the automated system. So it's a centralized system that allows you to manage the different data that you might have at a different aspect of the company. Does that make sense? Let's say you have a large company with different departments. You have a centralized unit where you can see the cloud, you can see the type of data resources that are in the cloud, and then you can determine, let's say that it's occupying a large sorry, did someone just if you can please mute yourself. Okay, thank you. So with the automated scaling, it means that you can edit the amount based on the demand. So like a balloon, if there's more demand, it's going to expand. If there's less demand, it's going to shrink. You might say, okay, we're going to pay for X amount of space on the cloud. And I'm now seeing in the company, looking at the company overall, there's certain elements that we might need to delete certain data based on the data type. For example, you can automatically change that from your automated system. So it means that, let's say there's too many demand from your automated system, you can pay for more storage or you can pay for less storage, but everything is centralized. That's why it's automatic. It changes based on the demand that your company has, but from a centralized unit.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. So I'm now going to assign people to rooms. By the way, I'm going to be doing this based on kind of A to Z. And then I'm assigning other people. And then I'm gonna assign the group. And then okay, just making sure I have everyone. Okay. So you should all be assigned a room now. Let me know if you guys have gotten it.
That makes sense.
Sorry, guys.
I don't know if that makes sense or not. And then probably monitoring the traffic for, like, I feel like slowing it down for people that don't necessarily need to access it at that time. I don't know, but that's all.
Okay, that's not bad. Does anyone else want to share their thoughts?
Yeah, sorry.
So who
Okay.
was that?
So for my own group, we actually looked at having to assess the bandwidth of the data that are going to be the bandwidth in terms of the capacity of the data that is going to be migrated over the internet, and to also see the impact on the business. Then because if we don't consider that, then the traffic that's is being presumed may actually happen. So what that means is that the data can be either compressed or work out in the kind of be migrated in by scheduling a timing where there is not much transaction, say off peak and low peak. And also by trying to duplicate the data so that there is no much traffic or much impact on the internet.
Okay, very good answer. I think somebody else, before I start talking about the answer, had their hands up. Who was it? Sorry, I didn't get that person. Okay. Well, if I had missed you, please, if I move on, please feel free to also add your contribution to the chat. So I would say, like, we're not looking for a set answer. The answers might vary because, number one, depending on your scenario, the company you're looking at, the industry you're looking at will determine on what kind of procedure you'll be looking at. I think with this was very general in our question. It wasn't kind of given a specific industry. But what I will say is very close to Chinere's answer is that you have to think about the bandwidth of the deployment team. Now, if they require a higher bandwidth, you need to think about, again, your scalability. Is it something that you're going to scale up, or is it something they're going to scale out? And also, you're going to have to be thinking about your redundant connection and how do you mitigate that concern. So I think what you said is, like, understanding, is it that is at different peak seasons or at different times that higher bandwidths are being used? And if it is, how do you mitigate that? Is it something that can be mitigated? Is it something that may require you to be more flexible in the amount of kind of storage space you're requiring for that migration? And also, again, thinking about the different storage type, what storage type is being utilized as well. So these are the kind of things that I guess would be the answer. But again, there's no set answer. In regards to your approach, you just wanted to see your approach and how you would mitigate the concern. But it is a very serious concern. I see someone is laughing, Deborah. So it is a serious concern, but it depends. I think for this type of answer is if you justify it saying, hey, I know for this particular industry and this particular scenario, this is how we would implement it based on how we'll deal with a higher bandwidth connection, and this is how we'll be able to mitigate concerns. The approach is what's more important than necessarily the answer. So you're looking for a set approach and how you will mitigate that rather than it being like specific, because different industries are going to require different approaches. I'm seeing Francis.
Please, sorry for cutting you short. I just wanted to know if it has anything whatsoever to do with like a security issue.
Yes, it is a serious concern, because if you're thinking about the migration project, you're going to be thinking about how do you ensure that the data during that migration is secure. So there's a security element to it, but it's also ensuring that the traffic is not overwhelmed. And if it is overwhelmed, it's going to reduce the performance, which can then cause a security concern. So although why it's not like a one-stop security concern, there are certain elements step by step, if we're looking at the issues and the concerns, that would cause us to have a security concern. So if we're looking at the migration, within that kind of migration of data flow, how do we encrypt that? How do we ensure that it's secure? Secondly, how do we ensure that the traffic is at a manageable rate, so that if it becomes overwhelmed, it doesn't reduce performance and in turn make the system more vulnerable to certain attacks.
Okay. So if you were to say that, first of all, let's make sure that this data is stored, like accessed on a secure browser. Could this also fly? Like say, let's make sure it's accessed like via HTTPS or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, that would be in your mitigation process of how
Oh, beautiful.
you would mitigate the concern. So if it's a higher bandwidth connection and it's causing the traffic to be overwhelmed, it would be looking at how do you mitigate that. So what would you do? Would it be a thing where you might scale up for higher space so that the traffic is at a manageable stage, or is it a thing where you might kind of reduce the amount of usage that's being done, saying, okay, we notice that this is the higher traffic hours, so this is how we're going to mitigate that concern. Tasha, I don't know if I heard your answer.
Oh no, I was just gonna basically say to have some sort of like individualized security on the network. So when instead of it just flowing all at once, you know. I don't know if that was correct. I don't know. So yeah, that was just it.
No, I think that's not bad to mitigate it that way. I guess it would be in the scenario, maybe it's a thing where if they have their own individualized traffic, I can see where the issue might be with that, because we're looking more at a centralized system, but I do think that the approach is something that is doable.
Okay.
So I think that was a good approach, Tasha. Dio and then Deborah.
I was going to ask with live data, like data that has to be live. How are you going to treat that? How are you going to move that without? Because I can see you said with the redundant connection to mitigate the concern. So I was thinking, if it was say for instance, let's say it's a council, your local council's website where there's a payment system for services, which of course I know people do. Maybe I know Saturdays or Sundays might be best time to do that, but of course we still know that some people will try and, irrespective of, they will try and access the services. So what do you do with live data? How do you migrate such? Thank you.
No worries. I think with let me go up. I think with live data, I think that would be based on, if we're looking at the storage type, I think that would be based on ensuring two things: hypertext transfer protocol secure, so HTTPL. Would it be, are we focusing on a website? Are we focusing on a system, like a software system?
I was thinking more in line with like a website anyway.
Then we'll be using the HTTPS.
Okay, software?
Software will be looking more at secure shell.
Okay, gotcha.
And Deborah, for your question?
Yeah, I know the answers you said that it can vary. I just wondered as well, like for instance, when you take something like a CRM, like a Salesforce CRM, for instance, and you want to do such data migration and movement, and you get this type of scenario, is it also valid to say maybe, because sometimes like you can do the operation when not a lot of people are using it. Is it the same concept or is it different? Like the timing. So when not many people will be on the network and stuff like that. Could that be something that you would consider?
I mean, in that case, then it would be okay, so I think that deals with demand. So if a lot of people are not using it, but again, I think you would have to look at the average, because even if there's a fluctuation with people using it based on time, what is the average usage? If it's something that is high, then you might want to think of like a hot storage, because it's something that on an average, even though there are times where it's not being used, on average a lot higher, then you might be looking at more of like a hot storage approach, because it has a normal high traffic, if that makes sense. If on average it's lower, then you can kind of see how you can automate your demand. So you might say, okay, from this period, we're going to have X amount of storage, and then at this period, because it's going to be less people accessing the website or whatever, is going to be reduced as a way of us managing kind of our usage. Because remember when I talked last week, on Monday, where it's kind of like some cloud services kind of a pay-as-you-go model, so that that approach might then work.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Chinyere, did you just raise your hands up?
Yeah, so I just wanted to add to what she said earlier. So in terms of data migration, there is a lot of strategy that is actually being put in place, which actually includes communicating to the users of the intent to migrate data and activities that should be minimized in order not to overwhelm the internet also. So this also goes a long way to help. And also, she mentioned about migrating live data. So oftentimes for transactional data, mostly for organizations that are actually working on real times, most data are always migrated like midnight, like early hours of 12, and by 12:30, they're actually done. And this is done over the hot storage, using the hot storage. This is to ensure that there is no impact on the network and people even know that data are migrated using the secure method. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you so much, Chinere, for adding that to the conversation. Dio, I see your hand is still up. Did you still have a question? Just want to make sure
No. Sorry, that was from before.
No worries. So we're now going to move to the second part, which deals with let me see, which deals with, how do I come out of here? Okay, which deals with recognizing cloud design aspects. So because of time, I might whiz through this a little bit more quickly than the other one. So this one, we're gonna discuss the important aspects of cloud design, and it's going to go past stuff that we discussed on Monday. So questions to ask is, which cloud deployment model will your organization use? And which cloud service models will your organization use? So looking at the deployment model and also the service model. And then we're going to discuss about the future growth of cloud design components. So when thinking about kind of cloud service models or which one we should use, I would say kind of like a recap of what we discussed yesterday. When thinking about models, we're thinking about SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS. So going back, just kind of recap before I talk about the public, private, community, and hybrid. SaaS is software as a service, and that deals with cloud-based services where you can access an application via an internet browser. So there'll be no need for you to kind of like install or maintain software, because updates are automatic and scaling is easy. That's kind of like what the benefits of that. With PaaS is provides a platform allowing customers to develop, run, and manage an application without infrastructure complexities. And this kind of like streamlines the development process and automates business policies and allows for easy collaboration. So when we're talking about infrastructure as a service, that deals with virtualized computing resource over an internet, and this allows full control over infrastructure and is scalable and flexible. And these tends to be virtual machine servers and storage and networking. Oh, sorry, I'm seeing. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean class yesterday. I meant class on Monday. Sorry, guys. Now when we're thinking about what model your organizations will use, there are 4 different elements as discussed on Monday. So we have public, which is cloud resources. So these are shared amongst unrelated organizations without the possibility of one organization impacting another. Cloud is when private is when these are owned by its business itself. So it's more secure, but it's also quite complex. And then we have community, which is, I think I gave an example of NHS, which is cloud resources that are co-owned by a few businesses that share a similar cloud security and resource requirements, but they also are individual in their own entity. And then there's hybrid model, when organizations may combine different models depending on the type of data. So when you're thinking about this and we're thinking about the deployment model and the models, it's important to think about the type of company that we are discussing about, right? So when we're thinking about kind of future growth and the type of company is, you want to be thinking about, consider how each model can adapt to growing demands. So what is the future business growth of the company or the organization within you're working in? You also want to look at scalability of resources and services. So how do you ensure that the chosen model can scale resources and services according to your demand, right? And this goes back to earlier in today's session when I was talking about when we're looking at scalability, looking at bigger businesses, large enterprises, small to medium-sized companies, and kind of individual user for day-to-day personal usage. Those are different users. So because of that, you have to think about, okay, if it's a SME, is it a thing where it might scale up into a bigger enterprise? And if it is, what type of tools or what type of kind of chosen cloud model or cloud deployment model would be best suited to your company? Then you also have to think about your day-to-day operations. So this is understanding, how does a cloud service integrate with your daily operational task? And then finally, when we're looking at DevOps integration, is checking the compatibility and the support for your DevOps practices and tools within your organization. Again, this is determined on how big your organization is, whether it's a larger enterprise or whether it is a SME, a small to medium enterprise. So we're now going to go into risk management. So when we're looking around risk management, this is specifically when we're looking at cloud deployment. So in the public, private, community, and hybrid, we want to be talking about 4 things. So the first one is compliance management. So how do you create a system for managing compliance? So it's understanding your industry regulations and ensuring that your chosen cloud model adheres to the regulations for your industry. Also, you want to be thinking about what type of tools can help you monitor and manage these compliances in regards to the system for your compliance management. Then the second element is, how do we identify and manage risk, especially within cloud deployments? So how do you regularly assess your vulnerabilities? How do you regularly monitor and respond to your potential threats that you can see within your cloud deployments? And also it's good, especially when you're trying to decide what cloud service to use or what cloud type, cloud model type, and cloud deployment type to use, is to understand, how would you be able to kind of manage those vulnerabilities, and how would you be able to respond to your potential threats that you've identified? And then the third one is thinking about policy and procedure development. So how do you build comprehensive set of guidelines that dictate how cloud services should be used and how they should be managed? So how do you update these regularly as technologies and businesses that need to evolve? So when we're now going on to the final one, which deals with cloud security, how do you manage your cloud security? Is number 1, how do you implement robust security measures? And how do you ensure an end-to-end encryption? And how do you employ firewalls? And how do you set up regular security audits? These are all important. So when you're thinking about cloud security, you're thinking about, 1, you're talking about four things. So the first one is how to ensure end-to-end encryption. The second one is how to employ your firewalls. The third one is how to set up regular security audits. And the fourth one is how do you implement a robust security measure. So those are the four things that you need to be thinking about when you're thinking about cloud security measures, or how to manage your cloud security. So I've talked about scaling. I think I kind of alluded to it before. And with the question, it kind of dealt with scaling a bit. So I would say when we're thinking about the essence of scaling is how do you adapt an infrastructure capacity to cater to current demands without compromising performance and unnecessary costs. So if you remember when I was talking about the answer, I was talking about performance. You have to think about performance, because when performance is hampered in a way or tampered in a way, it can cause vulnerabilities, which can cause security risk. Also, when we're thinking about the benefits of thinking about resource and service elasticity, and especially when we're looking at essence of scaling, is that it provides agility, it helps you meet your business demands, and it also ensures that you have an efficient resource utilization. Why? Because by doing that, you'll be able to guarantee customer satisfaction. So when we're thinking about the two types of scalings, I talked about scaling out and scaling up. So scaling out is expanding, adding more resources to what you already have, while scaling up is expanding existing resources that you already have. So when we're looking at scale outs, so scale out has to do with horizontal scaling, right? So this is adding more resources to support a given workload. So I would say that the definition of scale out is how do you expand capacity by adding more instances of resource. So this could be you adding a server to your existing pool, for example. And what are the key features of a scale out is, number one, you have your distributed workload. It spreads the load across multiple servers or instances. And then the second thing to think about is that it's statelessness, which means that it's ideal for systems where each request can be processed independently. So if you have a scenario or an example where, let's say an e-commerce website, for example, and they have a surge in traffic during a sale, let's say it's Black Friday, for example, more web servers can be added to distribute the load and to help ensure a smooth operation during that high demand period. That's you scaling out. Now, when we move on to the next part, which is scale up, that's looking at your vertical scaling, right? So that means that you're boosting your capacity by enhancing the specification of an existing resource. So this could be you're augmenting a server's RAM or CPU. So it deals with adding more resources to an existing server deployment. And I would say a good example of this is that it has two good features. The first one is that it has a concentrated enhancement. So it means that you're uplifting the capabilities of a single entity or a single server, and you're also able to have that statefulness. So you know how scale out was looking at statelessness, scale up looks at statefulness. Now, statefulness means that it's suitable for applications where data from previous requests are used in subsequent ones. So an example of this would be adding more RAM to a server. Now, I will say there is limitation with scaling up, and that is that there is an eventual hardware limit. So you can't endlessly enhance a single server's specification. At some point, you will need to scale out and add more resources. So that's a limitation of scale up that you might want to consider. Now, when we are moving on to the next one, which is kind of like shows us, is that with the scaling out, as you're seeing, is adding more resources to your distributed environment, while scaling up means adding resources to existing deployment. So just a visual representations of what we've discussed about scaling out, which deals with horizontal scaling, and scaling up, which deals with vertical scaling up. So scaling out, you're adding more resources. Scaling up, you are adding more resources to existing deployments. But again, remember what I said about the limitation. There's only so much enhancement you can do to your hardware there is going to be a limit at some point. So now when we're thinking about the risk management of the design aspects, I would say we're looking at risk management fundamentals. It's dealing with the process of identifying, assessing, and controlling threats to an organization's cloud-based assets. And the reason why this is important is because it ensures there is a continued availability of services, and it also ensures that there's a protection of data, and you also have a mitigation for potential losses. Now, when we're talking about potential losses, I talked about redundancy earlier. What does redundancy mean? Redundancy means when you have when you're implementing multiple instances of resources to ensure continuous operations. So even if one fails, there's kind of like a continuous operation going on. Why is this important? For two reasons. One, when we're looking at redundancy, the importance of it is that it avoids a single point of failure. Why? Because it's ensuring that the failure of one component does not bring down the whole system. And it also creates a consistent user experience, because if we go back to the example, to the definition of redundancy, is when you're implementing multiple instances of resources to ensure there's a continuous operation. Now, because there's a continuous operation, there is going to be a consistent user experience, because user experience, they experience minimal disruptions, because even during system faults, because there's multiple points that can be accessed during that time. So redundancies are used as a risk management procedure or protocol. Now, another thing to think about when we're looking at risk management of design aspects is high availability, right? So high availability, and in my opinion, the role of nines. So high availability is often measured in nines, right? So the definition is of high availability is a design approach that is aimed at minimizing the downtime and ensuring an application remains available to users even during failures. Now, when we're looking at the 9 matrix or the 5 nines, it basically denotes to the system uptime. So when we're looking at the 5 nines or 99.999%, it means that your system experiences only 5.26 minutes of unplanned downtime a year. So the goal is that within a year, you only have 5.26 minutes of unplanned downtime per year. And why this is important is because it supports business continuity. I know we haven't talked about business continuity or disaster management. So business continuity is ensuring that when there is a cyber attack, or if there is a disaster, for example, whether it's environmental or human implied disaster, that their business is still running, that there's operational resilience no matter what happens. And by adhering to this high availability and having this 5 nines, it indicates that we have a business continuity, because it retains the consumer's trust, and it ensures that service level agreements, which are seen as SLAs, are adhered to. Now, when we're looking at disaster recovery, it's all about preparing for the worst. So the definition of disaster recovery is strategies and measures for recovering data, applications, and systems after a disruptive event. So the components of this would be having a backup, having a plan, and testing. So when we're looking at backup under disaster recovery, we're looking at how are you regularly storing copies of data in multiple locations to ensure that you always have a backup of data in case anything happens. The second thing is plan. Are you documenting the steps to restore the services after an event? These are important because if you're storing the steps, number one, it allows the internal staff to know, in a case of this type of event, this is what we're expected to do. These are the communications that we're expected to make. These are the steps that we're expected to follow to ensure that we are kind of following our own internal risk. Deborah, I'm confused at your question. what kind of disaster recovery. I mean, there are various types of disaster recovery. It could be a cyber attack. It could be a fire that resulted in your physical systems being destroyed. Disaster recovery deals with any type of disruption to your business operations. But going back to the definition, it focuses on, when we're then looking at how do you recover from a disaster, it deals with what are the strategies and measures that you have in place to recover data, applications, and systems after a disruptive attack. So again, it's going back to the components of disaster recovery. So you would be looking at having a backup to ensure that your data are always secure, that you always have a backup of your data. You have a plan to document the steps on how you restore services after an event so that your internal team knows. And then testing, how do you regularly verify the effectiveness of your recovery plan? So I think Chineri put in the chat, that is, how do you restore businesses as quickly as possible without impacting the business, which is like another great way of kind of explaining disaster recovery. And it's important because going back to the CIA triad, it deals with integrity. So it ensures data integrity, and it also minimizes data loss and also supports your regulatory compliance as a company as well. So that is why disaster is recovery, and that is kind of the components that you'll be required, the backup plan, the testing that would be required for a disaster recovery plan. And Sasha also put aiming for BAU, yes, so aiming for business as usual. So when we're talking about recovery objectives, we have your RPO and we have your RTO. Now your RPO is kind of quantity of time between most recent backup and the disaster. So it provides an understanding on how much data the organization can accept, can acceptably lose. So a great definition of an RPO is the maximum acceptable amount of data loss measured in time. So for example, if an RPO is 2 hours, backup, it means that the backups might be taken every 2 hours. So because the backups are taken every 2 hours, your RTO that you're looking at would be 2 hours. Then you have your RTO. Your RTO deals with recovery time objective. Now, your recovery time objective is how quickly can you recover the needs to occur or maintain your business continuity. So it provides an understanding of how long the business can function in the event of a disaster. So it's RTO really looks at the target time within which a business process must be restored after a disruption to maintain your business continuity. So for example, if an RTO is 4 hours, it means that the system should be fully functioning within that time frame post a disruption. So an example here is there's a disaster. So your data recovery point is your backup, and then your RPO is how far back do we have usable data, while your RTO looks at your time to recover to get you back to business as usual. So that is a great way of thinking about your RPO, you're working back, your RTO, you're working forward. Now, kind of a good way to kind of recap everything that we've discussed is kind of understanding, I've talked a bit about like business, a business analyst and what they do. So when we're looking at business analysts, they provide information to cloud architects who then design cloud solutions tailored to the needs of the business. So let's say you're thinking about what type of roles do I want to get after this certification. I would definitely suggest becoming a business analyst. There are also other business analyst certifications that would be good as well, just to enhance your application for that role. But what we have learned is when we're looking at cloud architects, they will define your cloud deployment models based on business needs. So this is your cloud architect will be defining, okay, in what case do we need to use private? In what case do we need to be public? In what case might we use community deployment model? And in what scenario might we use a hybrid model? Your cloud architect would also decide on which cloud services to implement. Again, is it going to be SaaS? Is it going to be PaaS? Or is it going to be IaaS? So if you want to work more in cloud, you might also consider a career as a cloud architect as well. A cloud architect will also use the information about the business structure to be able to design for scalability and elasticity. For example, like what we discuss in groups, these are the kind of questions you would be working on as a cloud architect. And you also be having design considerations, which must include appropriate use of scale out and scale up procedures. And finally, your cloud designs must also account for business continuity. So you must have redundancy, which is all about having backup resources in place to ensure service remains uninterrupted. High availability. How do we design systems with minimal downtime? And your disaster recovery. How do you ensure that you have pre-planned strategies and steps to recover your data and recover your systems after a mishap? And this is all important because by having all these in place, you have an uninterrupted service, and you'll also be able to safeguard your data, and you'll also be able to retain your customers' trust as well. So now we're going to go into question time. So for the first question, is adding more compute resource to an existing web server an example of a scale up or a scale out?
Do
you guys want to put the answer in the chat? So what do we think? Scale up, or are we scaling out? Okay, so I'm feeling scale up, I'm feeling scale out.
Scale out.
Okay.
Sarame.
Thank you so much, Sarame. So for the next one, we're going to, when we're looking at the answer, the answer is scale up. So everyone who said scale up, completely right. Why? Because scale up deals with vertical. Remember, vertical is all about how do you add to your existing resource? How do you expand your existing resource? How do you enhance your existing resource? When we're talking about scale out, it deals with horizontal. How do you add more resources? So the key word, especially if you see it in an exam, is looking at the existing. If it's an existing that you are trying to add more resources to, you're looking at scale up. If you're just adding more resources, it's going to be scale out. So good job for everyone who got the answer. Second question. Which deployment model defines a cloud deployment where some resources are stored in a private data center and managed by the organization, while other resources are stored in a cloud service provider's cloud deployment? Okay, I'm seeing hybrid. Okay, and everyone is right, it's hybrid. Why is it hybrid? Because you are using a mixture of deployment models. You're not just focusing on one. You're not just focusing on community, on public, or on private. You are using a mixture, and because of that, it's going to be a hybrid model. Now for the final one, I think an organization needs a cloud service model that supports Python for the development team. Which of the 3 cloud service models is the best choice? Do you remember what cloud service models are? Okay.
PaaS and IaaS.
Okay, I'm hearing PaaS and IaaS. Okay, a lot of people are using PaaS. Okay. The answer is a platform as a service. So because when we're looking at Python that supports Python, remember it's all about, I think the example that we gave as platform of service was Google Play Store. With the Google Play Store, developers are creating apps to deploy on there. So they are using different type of coding tools to be able to create these applications to be able to put on the platform. So because of that, platform as a service. So when you think about platform as a service, I think a great way to think about it is Google Apple Store. Because that's kind of like a great way to understand on who the target users are, and how and what type of tools might be used within that scenario. So these are reflective questions that I want everyone to think about, because next week, Monday, we're going to be discussing these reflective questions before we move on to the next sessions. So this is like your homework for you to kind of go and think about. I know that you guys are in buddy groups as well, so definitely do reach out to your buddy groups, or if you guys are part of the WhatsApp group that I sent an email that Afia set up, definitely discuss these questions on that platform as well. So what is the role of your company in the cloud, in a cloud migration process, and how does your business knowledge and experience impact your analysis of cloud services that might benefit your company? So I'm also going to put this on the Geneva app so that you guys can have it there as well. But yeah, oh, okay, we've kept to time, but I would give everyone just 1 more minute to be able to take a screenshot of this. It will also be on the Geneva platform, but we'll be discussing this when we get back on Monday before we move on to the second element of the course.
I have a question.
All right.
Yep. So I think in the either in the introduction in the introductory section or the last class we had, you mentioned that you'd be sending the link and like an overview or like summary of Cylon. So I just wanted to like check in on the status of that.
Oh, sure. That's going to be sent on Monday.
All right, thank you.
No worries. I see Hawa.
Yes, please. Sorry, I just want to get a clearer picture of the first question. What is your role in your company's cloud migration process? So are we just assuming a role, or I'm not really sure about the question?
So the question is, let's say you're a cloud architect, what would be your role in your company's cloud migration process?
So do we assume the role?
So it's assuming the role. Ooh, let me go back. So assuming the roles, I think if we remember the guidelines, I outlined what the role of a cloud architect would be.
So are we just assuming to be a cloud architect?
Yes. And then how would you how would you go through the cloud migration process?
Okay.
Oh, let me go back to the thing. Offer, I see you have your hands up.
Yeah, I haven't been assigned to a group yet.
Oh, I think it's because you joined late. Okay, I will update that tonight. I'll update that tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Howard, do you still have any more questions? Because I see your hands up.
No, please.
Okay. Let me just check the chat to make sure there isn't any. Sade, on the project, do you want us to do a Word document or PowerPoint slide? So you'll be expected to do 2 things. So from the introductory section I had last week, you're expected to send in a report, which can be in a Word document, or you could put it as a PDF. And then your PowerPoint slide will be you presenting what you've written on your report. Does that answer your question, Sade?
Sorry, I wanted to ask, or I even asked in the group, is it an individual project or is it based on the group?
Oh, it's individual.
Or is it individual?
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
and sorry again, I want to ask. The information provided is not conclusive enough for us to carry out this. I don't know, maybe it's just me feeling this way.
no, that's why I said I was gonna. So I don't know if you guys remember during your interviews, I said in the second week you guys will have like the project to work on. I think I gave an overview of the project on the program pack, but we'll be sending the full pack on Monday.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
So yeah, the PowerPoint is just you guys kind of talking about it should be recorded, and it's you explaining. It's a 5 minutes video of you presenting the work that you have on the report. So the presentation slide is us kind of seeing you presenting what you've come up with. And then your report is focused on kind of like more detailed elements of what is expected. Does that make sense, Shade? There aren't limits on words, but I would say that try not to make it more than 5 pages. Okay. Any more questions before we close today's session?
Sorry, I didn't quite get that. Try not to do more than 5 what?
Pages, 5 pages.
Okay.
So these reflective questions are just homework today for us to discuss next week. These reflective questions, I think, are also in your student pack as well. No, the reflective question is not part of your project. Sorry, I'm seeing 2 questions. I don't understand the second question, my Cassie.
It's the project that we're talking about with the PowerPoint document. That's the one that's due at the beginning of October, right?
Yeah. I can't remember the date, but I know the date is in the program pack.
Okay, so does it mean that we're submitting a Word document as well as a PDF, sorry, a PowerPoint, right?
Yeah, so if you see in the program pack, it says that you should send the report and then send a 5 minutes recording. So you're not necessarily giving us the presentation slides. You're just recording yourself, explaining, going through your presentation slides to present the work that you've done.
Okay.
Okay. Did I miss anyone else? Let me just check. Okay. I think I've answered everyone's question. Yeah, Afia, you can, however you want to do a presentation, you can. We're open to creativity.
So
Okay.
from what I understand, it's not a video per se of yourself presenting. It could be it could be, sorry, go on.
Oh, sorry, finish. Sorry, my break.
So I'm thinking like you've got slides with a voiceover, is that not it? Or just presentation slides, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you could show your face or not. It depends on you.
Okay.
But the recordings are not going to go anywhere. It's just going to be sent to Cylon to decide on which presentation and reports that they prefer.
Okay.
Okay, I think I have answered everyone's question because I'm also conscious of time. So Kemi, I'll quickly Kemi, outline of what's expected is in the program pack, but on Monday we'll be sending the full pack.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
No worries. So thank you all for coming. We're going to conclude on today's session. And then I should also be putting this recording on the Geneva app tomorrow. So watch out for that.
Thank you.
No worries. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.